Hello, and welcome to another episode of Rule of Carnage. This is a set of videos, podcasts, chats, and conversations where myself, Glenn Ford, a game designer and developer, chats to this guy, Mike Hutchinson, another game designer, developer, and all-round splendid chap, about games, many of which we have collaborated on. And because of that, today we're going to have a conversation about the nature of collaborating on a design project, development, game, whatever it is that you're working on. We're going to have, I think, a couple of conversations at least about this subject. So we thought we would kick off today's conversation by sort of talking about how we first came together to sort of work on games and designs, a little bit of a story of the beautiful and burgeoning relationship that we carved out over the game known as Gaslands to the world, and maybe sort of find some nuggets of how that could happen for other people. So my relation, my remembrance of the origin story and what I sort of say to people, because I for people who don't know, end up running Gaslands at conventions a little bit more often than Mike makes them to, for a range of reasons, and often people come over and they say, so is this your game? Did you design this? Did you make this? Some people, I remember a Games Expo a couple of years ago, somebody posting on, I think, Twitter saying, a Gaslands here, is the Gaslands guy here? And somebody else saying, well, there's a guy who says he's the Gaslands guy, but he's not the Gaslands guy, because Gaslands guy has floppy hair. And so I sort of do have to explain.
When people come up to the table, though, they look at the two of us. You've got the more impressive beard, so they assume you're the originator.
So I have a few times sort of had to explain who I am and what my relationship is with Gaslands. And the origin story I tell is that once upon a time we were at our gaming club, and Mike basically walked in and more or less said, okay, I've sold a game to Osprey, now we need to write it. Sort of
that is literally my process, by the way.
Presented this sort of relatively sort of sketched out idea for a game, which had some sort of strong punchy ideas and some really cool parts to it, and some bits that were at various stages of being horrible. And I started, I helped with the play tests. I ran play tests for the game, and I think from my perspective, I just gave more and more persistent notes than everybody else who was sort of working on it and play testing it, and sort of hit Mike with more and more of a sort of weight of words, until eventually he sort of folded and accepted that I was going to be a significant sort of element in the process. And we sort of found a relationship through that process, I think, where and we'll talk about more in the following conversations how we sort of learned where the spaces are for each other. That's vaguely how I remember us coming together. What was it, because I've never, what was it like for you, sort of me, because there was a point where every now and again you got sort of a sheaf of papers jammed through your letterbox, and as a bearded man ran giggling away into the distance. Read that.
I mean, it was funny initially because obviously we attended the same the Canterbury Crusaders Wargaming Club, and there's a bunch of gamers there playing a bunch of different games. Some like us, very magpie-ish and jumping from system to system. Some people who've got their kind of regular opponents and their regular games. And I suppose I wasn't really sure what the initial reaction from my kind of friends and club mates would be on the topic of, I've got a game published, I need some help working on it. I guess I assumed that there would be a lot of instant enthusiasm for being like, oh, I can be part of something that's going to be published. I want to be part of that. And for some, there definitely was, like, there quite quickly emerged a group of about 5 or 6 club mates that were like really interested in the fact that there might be a game coming out of this and that they might be part of something, and like a vast majority of people who would just sort of go like, oh cool, and then just crack on with their normal game, which I remember quite early on in the process, Glenn, you sort of expressing some like confusion at, be like, why would you, like, if you spend all of your time playing these games, why would you not want to be engaged in the creation of one? And of course the answer is that not everyone finds the act of creation particularly interesting, and you did and had in the past in other sort of spheres, whether that's like writing campaigns or running events, and so I guess that initial stage was a mixture of trying to figure out where my allies would be who were interested in contributing and helping me work through the problem, and then I think figuring out what, because I've worked with teams making stuff like software and products and things for most of my working life, and this sort of felt like it was going to be somewhat similar, but I didn't really know because I'd never made a game in this way before. And so I guess I started to figure out that in order to help get the right kind of feedback or input from people, I was going to have to maybe adopt a stance that I was used to adopting in my day job, which was one of like, I have a vision for a thing and I'm going to define some principles about what the thing that we're going to make that delivers that vision can or cannot be. And in some regards, those are arbitrary decisions, and they just provide swim lane. They provide bumpers on either side of the swim lane to figure out what you can and can't do with a project. And I guess like as we got further into it, like it just became super clear that you were both extremely interested in helping make the game and make the game better, and like fundamentally different in your neural pathways to the way that you considered certain elements. And so I just was fascinated and baffled by much of your feedback, because it wasn't feedback that I would be able to give myself, and in lots of cases was super useful. But I imagine, thinking back, there were some phases perhaps where I don't know, did you ever feel like I was like initially like knocking you back or being like, get off my thing?
I mean, I think the thing about sort of finding a collaborative relationship is that you have to get very lucky, I think, for a lot of it, because there's something inherently paradoxical about the fact that you need somebody who has a different enough point of view to you that it's worthwhile and valuable working with them. If you're working with somebody who just tells you what you're already thinking, you know, you can just not have a partnership. But at the same time, you end up, you have to work quite closely together. So you have to both sort of, you know, have somebody who will think something different from you, but both be able to respect that difference, which are two sort of kind of hard things to sort of have together at the same time. And I think particularly, I think as you just said there, one of the things about any game, and I think this is something that's going to come up a few times in this sort of conversation, is that a lot of the choices that you make about your game are going to be arbitrary choices. And, you know, particularly with Gaslands, and it's happened sort of repeatedly when we've worked together, it's like, you know, I go for a process of saying, look, I don't care which of these two choices sort of get made. Both of these ones are valid, but you're going to have to help me to understand which of these paths your vision is going down. And then there are the other pieces which are just like, okay, this isn't a matter of opinion. This is wrong. That this thing here is just factually incorrect. And again, you know, so many of these things are about personality and relationship and how you work together. Because, you know, one of the great things is that relatively early on, because, you know, I think that we've said a few times that, you know, we have these different perspectives, and that, you know, from the early days, it's clear that I was the sort of the tournament player who, some of the first things I did with Gaslands was go in and break some of the points values and some of the stats of the vehicles to just go, look, this is wrong, watch me show you that it's wrong, you can't let people do this because it will just trash the game. And the bus was one of the first things. If people think that the bus is occasionally overpowered at the moment, it is as nothing to the game-wrecking beast that it was in the first iteration. And very early on, I was quite gratified that when it came to those sorts of questions, I could tell you that something was off and you accepted it. As opposed to, we had a lovely team of playtesters, but there were some people, I told you that something else was off, you accepted it, and I didn't feel the need to prove it to you. And I think that in many ways encapsulates the part of the reason we have quite a good working relationship, because a few times we have playtesters who came in, said that they thought a certain thing was off. We all said, sure, we accept that, that's fine, we'll get that changed. And they said, no, we're now going to go through a game where I prove to you that it's off. And it's like, none of us need this, none of us need you to do that. We're all we can respect each other's abilities in different fields. I mean, and again, I think one of the reasons we thought worked together quite well on those things is that I have an opinion, certainly with game design, I have an opinion that ideas are cheap.
Yeah, no, 100% agree with that.
And for me, if anything, it was lovely that you were letting me into your sort of sandbox, and I had the opportunity to play with it, build some things out of it, and throw them at you and go, all of the difficult decision-making processes about what do or don't work, or whether this jigsaw piece fits in, I don't have to do. I can just have fun. I can do some building blocks. I can create some things and I can give them to you. And I can say, I had fun making this thing. And the fact that sometimes you just, you're just like, no, let's bin this off, this isn't going to run, this isn't going to work, was of so little concern to me that I can't tell you. There were some ideas that I was genuinely quite invested in, and again, there's a certain amount of this of, I've learned to give an idea, advocate for it, and accept that you respect me enough to listen to that advocation, and I don't need to fight the corner for things in a way that maybe I did at one point. And if you've listened to me advocate for it and decide that it isn't the choice for this game, I'm fine with it. And there was a time when I wasn't fine with it because I didn't think you couldn't have listened, because it was such a good idea, so it needed a couple more pushes. And now I've gotten past that, where it's like, no, Mike heard and he understood, and that's just not how game design works. Some things don't work for various reasons, and sometimes, and again, early on, I think you said back, okay, no, this is going to work for a product design reason, it's going to work for this reason. And more we've grown into a shorthand of, you need less and less, I think, to tell me that this isn't right for this game.
And I think a lot of that was the good fortune that I came into Gaslands with a pretty strong idea about what I wanted the game to be like. Some other projects have taken me a lot longer to get a bead on exactly what is and isn't inside the magic circle. But there are some exceptions here, but for whatever reason, like much of the Gaslands feeling and sort of principles about what should and shouldn't be a Gaslandsy thing were quite intuitively clear to me from fairly early on. So I was able to have a bit more of a practical rationale for, like, I hear this idea and it's not where I want the game to go, even though you haven't seen the game do this thing yet. Like, here's where I'm trying to push, and this is going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and I think it was also interesting because, and we spent quite a long time developing Gaslands, and I was running a lot of like a bit of biography in the early days of Gaslands. Mike was having a young person enter into his life with a new child, and I wasn't, and had considerably more sort of available time in my life, and I did a lot of the sort of physical playtesting within our group, within our area. And there came a point where I had learnt sort of Mike's Gasland voice, as it were.
Mm.
And I was able to have people come in those sessions and present their, because people, a lot of people are lovely, they go away and they'd sort of, come back with a set of ideas that they had sort of beavered out and put together. And a lot of them, whilst we try and acknowledge them, there's a lot of people who put work in that has never, you can't give enough recognition to some people. And I got to a point where I was able to say, I like that, and with no disrespect, if I were making Gaslands, and I've always said there is a Glenn's version of Gaslands that could have happened in an alternative universe, I would probably put it in, but that's not Mike's Gaslands. I got to a point where I could adopt the sort of the Mike voice of going, I already know there's no point me presenting that to Mike because it's not part of his idea. It's like, and there was some of those that were relatively hard and fast rules, like that there's not a process for moving vehicles using the movement templates like at a diagonal, for example. And that was if you're getting sort of zoomed in, I think that was a really interesting decision, and it was one that came early on because for people that are curious about the Gaslands history, originally slides worked by a scatter dice and then you moving a short in a sort of scatter dice direction. And that was one of the early things that was like, it was a bit sort of and B, it felt wrong because you would come out of a certain maneuver and then slide in a very counterintuitive way from the way it would feel like you would slide out of it, and figuring out that was just a thing that wasn't part of the feel of the way that Gaslands templates operated on the tabletop.
It was like a decision that's like, the physics engine doesn't support this, so don't try and add a rule that does this because I'm telling you the physics engine doesn't support it.
Yeah, and that was one of those concrete moments where I could say to people, it's just a concrete example where I could say to people, look, I know you could do that. I know that the rules wouldn't be that complicated to write and to explain it, but that doesn't happen in Gaslands. That's just how it is. It is not one of the processes that the game really accepts in. And sort of figuring out those things and finding those spaces and sort of being able to operate together, I think it was very valuable, and it's been valuable in sort of ongoing projects that we've worked on together.
So this has been a very happy conversation of when things go well. I can't wait for the next conversation where we talk about when things go less well.
Yes. So that's a short chat about the origin story, I guess, of our collaborative relationship working on games. I think if there is a lesson to sort of impart here, is that, I've repeatedly sort of gone to people with play testing and development, and I've offered notes, and some of them have sort of developed through to a certain degree, and I've helped with a range of games. As my working with Mike was like the first thing I worked on seriously in relation to developing a game, and the more times I've sort of had a bit of that relationship with somebody else, the more I've come to recognize quite how lucky I was that me and Mike were my first experience with that. And it's just, and it is a roll of the dice. And it's not to say that, the other people that I tried to work with where it didn't happen couldn't work with anybody. They just couldn't work with me. And I think that the learning point there to a degree is that a lot of finding a good collaborative relationship, certainly early on, certainly when you haven't found your own process necessarily or learned to recognize it in others, is luck. There is a lot of luck to it, and I think I've learned more and more how to be a good sort of collaborator, and how to come at people in a certain way. But if it's your first time approaching somebody, trying to give feedback, trying to help with development, and it doesn't come to anything, it's not necessarily that collaborations don't work or that they don't work for you or you shouldn't sort of seek them out in the future. It's just sometimes those jigsaw pieces don't click, and there is kind of very little you can do about it, certainly until you've learned a bit more how to make it work. But
yeah, and hopefully in a future conversation we'll cover some of what we think is some of the tips for getting better at that. But yeah.
But for now, we will sign off on this this lovely little walk down memory lane. If you've watched through to this point, please do like and subscribe. It really helps us to sort of keep putting these videos out. If you have developed collaborative relationships yourself or attempted to develop collaborative relationships yourself in your game design, in whatever creative process you're working on, please let us know in the comments section. Tell us whether they worked, whether they broke down, why maybe you think they do or don't work. Tell us your sort of origin story of your collaborations, your processes, your relationships within game design. Look us up on social media, but for now I think it's going to be thank you and goodbye from this episode of Rule of Carnage. So thank you and goodbye. So goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.